Hello, it's an honor to be here today with you. I'm sorry I don't speak Spanish. I hope that my English will be understandable for you and we will be able to communicate. It's an honor for me, but it's also a privilege, and I think it's important to remember about this also, that especially when we are speaking about LGBT issues, LGBT rights and LGBT community, it's important to remember that not all of us have the privilege to be in places like this and to live in places like Bilbao is, especially when I've heard that you are ready and you are inviting us to feel like home, which was very touching for me. When I'm thinking about extremism in Europe, and when I'm speaking with my colleagues, for example, from Hungary or Italy, there's a thing which is really common, that the politicians and anti-LGBT movements, anti-LGBT agenda politicians are using the same tools in our countries. And I think that in our part of Europe it's very significant. And that's why I wanted to take you to a very quick time travel and travel to Poland in the next 20 few minutes to show you what happened, why it happened, and what we are doing now in Poland as an activist and also as an LGBT community, how we answer to the things which are happening in the last few years. So how we became an ideology and a threat to the nation. It's like the last year was very difficult in Poland for the LGBT community. But quick travel to Poland. I don't know if you know, it's not a very big country, like with 38 million population. We are in European Union since 2004, and I think it's very significant also that as a member of European Union, it's not so obvious when we are speaking what is happening now when it comes to LGBT community, because it's so obvious that if we are in European Union, we should have some rights and protections. What is also very significant, this year we had also anniversary of, it was 30 years after communism, so there were like very specific two anniversaries, 15 years of joining European Union and 30 years of becoming a democracy. Almost 90% of Polish people declare themselves as Roman Catholics. And this is what also Frank said. The religious and faith issues are also very significant when it comes to LGBT community. And as a trivia, I don't know if you've heard about this, but homosexuality is legal in Poland since 1932. And when I'm reminding about this, because it's a very common argument when right-wing politicians, for example, are saying that we don't have homophobia in Poland. We are like traditionally and historically a very open country. There's a lot of Western countries in which it wasn't so obvious that homosexuality is legal. Look, we are so like pioneers. We are also pioneers in something I'm not proud of, to be honest, because I think that what happened in Poland in 2015 is something we were like a step ahead in the different countries. Like we look, for example, on a Brexit. We look what happened in United States with Donald Trump. And to be honest, we had the same since 2015. We have like a massive women's rights demonstrations. We have like a resistance when it comes for the attacks for the democracy or for the public media and so on. So I think that it's also very interesting when it comes to the small city, a small country in an Middle Eastern Europe. On this year Rainbow Map prepared by ILGA, we became like a 27th or 28th countries in Europe when it comes to LGBT rights. So I think it's also very significant. So what happened in last years that we became so like a symbol of homophobic country in Poland and also symbol of rising far-right extremism. I think it's very interesting when we look, for example, on foreign media, on the Western media, how they are writing about Poland and what is interesting when we, for example, write news when we are looking for news from Poland in English. The most of the news are about what bad is happening. So we have things like this, which of course it looks like a joke, but it's not a joke, and it's like serious things are happening. But we also have things like this, and I will tell you in a moment more about what happened this year in July. But it's also like very, very specific. Quick brief about the situation of LGBT community in Poland. We don't have civil partnership and marriage equality. Hate crimes and hate speech are not penalized in our penal code. We don't have also gender recognition act. I don't know if you know, but in Poland, when a transgender person wants to have a gender recognition in a formal way, you have to sue your parents. There was there was an attempt to changing it, but it failed because of something I will tell you in a moment. And sexual education. For me, like the education is one of the most important thing when it comes to societies and when it comes to how we are dealing with homophobia, for example, and transphobia in societies. So now it's happening a bit in Poland, but in the local levels, and it's happening also because of the activists who are like trying to work with local authorities. And also because of the very, very not friendly politics when it comes to our government and local authorities, especially in the bigger cities, which are like convinced as something which is not very government friendly and is anti our ruling party. So as you can see, it's still like a lot of things to do. We are protected when it comes to workers' code, but it's because of being a member of the European Union. We have a sexual orientation. It's like the only document in Poland in which the sexual orientation is. And we also have our constitution, which there is a very famous Article 18, which is like a part of a fight if it's like allowing marriage between only, it's about like that family and marriage is like especially important when it comes to man and a woman, but like the lawyers are like fighting if it's like allowing another option, like for example civil partnership or even marriage equality or no. So it's like still a discussion, and it's of course also used by our opponents as an argument that we can't have like civil partnership or marriage equality. And we have like a very famous for us Article 32, which is saying that no one can be discriminated in a public life. So we also like using it, Article 32, when we are like discussing with politicians. What happened also before 2015, because I think it's very important when I'm thinking about our political situation in Poland. I always like to think that it's not like there are only the last 4 years during why bad things happened for our community. I think it's the years of not very courage and brave politicians who always were afraid that they can't do any progressive movements towards the LGBT community because the society don't want it. And it's always for me a problem that I think that politicians are far more homophobic than society is. So it's always like a problem because they are afraid of doing anything. So for 8 years, civic platform, which was run by our President of Europe, Donald Tusk now, who was a prime minister, and he was promising, for example, civil partnerships for a few years, and it never happened. So we have like a few attempts to pass civil partnership, but there was always like a big fight in a parliament, and it never happened. And there was, as I told you, there was also one attempt to pass Gender Recognition Act. And when I'm thinking about also extremism in Europe, I think it's important even I know that in Spain there's also things are happening. And it's always also important to think that if you're living in a country when you have already rights, we are like in a different level of communication also. If you have a marriage equality, if you're protected in the penal code, if you have like tools to fight with the extremism. And I think that there is a lot of grief in me when I think about the centrist politicians especially, who were not enough brave to even have like a, the very small version of civil partnership, because I think that in the moment, we will be now in a different moment politically and also as a community. So I think it's important to remember about this. And for me also, I think that I'm not afraid of far-right politicians. I'm always saying it. I'm afraid of centrist politicians who, in a will of winning with extremism, for example, they will sacrifice human rights. And I see that it's happening in Poland sometimes, that don't speak about this because it's like a fuel for people and they won't vote for us, for example, but because people don't like to speak about this. After 2015, as you probably know, in 2015, Law and Justice with Jarosław Kaczyński as a chief, as a leader, won an elections, and many things happened in Poland since this. We have there was, of course, the discussion about rule of law. There was an attack on public media. There was an attack of women's rights. They were trying to pass some kind of bill which was like banning abortion at all, even punishing women and doctors for it. So it was, maybe you've heard that we have like a mass protest, it's called Black Protest in Poland. So they like step back, but it was like really society organized themselves. There is also a question of environment, because in a times of climate crisis, it's like they say, politicians of Law and Justice Party and government says that it's like a fake news. It's not a problem. So we are a country, for example, of the coal and miners, and it's still like a discussion like this. And from the other hand, they are like cutting out trees from our national treasure, ancient forest, Puszcza Białowieska. So there were also protests when it comes to this thing. But I'm as similarly like Frank, I'm always trying to see for something positive in all those things which are happening. So for me, I'm always saying that it was a wake-up call for civil society, which we became a democracy in the last 30 years, and we did a big leap, a big jump, and so for many years, society wasn't interested in any civic activities. So I think that the last 4 years were quite important when it comes to this. And Rainbow was present during the protests. It wasn't easy at the beginning because it's a picture from Krakow when I'm living, and it's one of the march in a defense of independent judiciary. And the rainbow flag was always present. It was a problem. It was like, it's not your case. There are more important things than your rainbow flag. Why you're here? Maybe we should like wait for a better moment. And I think that a lot of people were like standing on our side. Even, for example, in the case of the defending on the independent judiciary, even judges said that they are happy that the rainbow is present, because if Law and Justice will change the law, we will be the first group we will feel the changes. So I think that in a country of solidarity movement, it was also very important that this solidarity happened also. In the last month, I've heard about myself many times that I'm a devil and Satan, but I also like to think about myself as a devil's advocate. And also thinking positively, what Law and Justice gave us. I think that more aware society when it comes to human rights, also thanks to the rainbow flag which was present on the mass demonstrations. I think that also the ally movement is like very common thing now, and it happened mostly in the last 4 years. We have like more coming outs. We have like prides in new places, in new cities, in the smaller cities. This year we have like there's like a record number of almost 35, around 40 cities which we have like equality marches and prides. And of course, a few months ago happened Spring Party, run by openly gay politician Robert Biedroń, with a very pro-LGBT agenda, for example, with the marriage equality in program. And I don't know if you heard, but Spring Party was a third political force in the European election in Poland with a 6%. It's not a big number, but I think it's very important that it happened. And we have like 3 MPs in Europarlament. So we have even like people with whom we can work when it comes to, for example, LGBT issues in a European Parliament. Okay, I wanted also to tell you a few words about so what happened in the last year, maybe a month, that LGBT community became an ideology and a threat to the nation. In 2015, before the general elections, Law and Justice leader said this disgusting thing, and there was a big campaign built on a fear to the refugees, and it was during a migrant crisis. And a lot of people think that thanks to this, they won the election because people were afraid of something they didn't know, especially in Poland. So in 2019, they found a new others. And in last weeks and months, many times I answered the question when I was speaking with the foreign journalists, for example. Why LGBT community? What happened? Because it was for 3 years of ruling, Law and Justice they were rather trying to silence the topic, that they were pretending that it's not existing, there is no LGBT community. So for us, the challenge was to be in the public and to be vocal and to show that we are still here and we need to fight for our rights. So I think that it's very significant, that it's easy to build a politics on fear. It's easy to build a politics to fear to others or something you don't know, for example. What else? I think that there's common tools which are used not only in Poland, they are used by politicians, far right-wing politicians and movements around Europe. Of course, fake news about sexual education. When we are speaking about the sexual education, the common argument is that, for example, the World Health Organization standards are teaching 4 years old to masturbate, and they are repeating it all the time in media and so on. So it's difficult to counter-argument it when you don't have like a place to speak about this, when they have like a public media. Anti-LGBT declarations on local levels, and I've heard that it's happening in Italy now, and politicians like taking the idea from Poland to implement it in their local levels. What is the anti-LGBT declarations? There are like symbolic bills passed by local authorities, which are saying that we are against the LGBT ideology, and in our region there is no place for the LGBT propaganda and so on. They are in a symbolic way saying to LGBT people, you are not welcome here. And for example, I live in Krakow. It's a second biggest city in Poland. Very popular when it comes to tourism, for example, very diverse, historically also, with a lot of foreigners living in Krakow. And the whole region, the voivodeship in which Krakow is Lesser Poland, passed something like this. And it's also important about being vocal internationally, for example, to telling authorities in Krakow that it's not very nice that, for example, tourists who are coming to Krakow know that they know that they are in a place, in a region which is should be free from LGBT people. And it's in our voivodeship, it's around 7 regions, smaller regions, will pass something like this. And for example, in Lesser Poland, there is a quote that we are a threat for the Christian tradition. So it's happening. At the end of July happened Pride in Białystok. It's a city in the eastern part of Poland. And it was famous because of the violence which it met. Stones were throwing at people, there were armed police, there were fights on the streets. Many of my friends were there. I couldn't come, but what people said after it was terrifying. It was a war on the streets in a city in the middle of Europe, in European Union. A few weeks ago, one of the right-wing newspapers, which is magazine, which is very close to our government, distributed stickers with LGBT-free zone. It was also very there was a big outrage about this, and foreign media also was covering the story. And what also happened, a few companies who are distributed, for example, media in Poland, they said, no, we are not going to sell this magazine because it's not okay. There is a case in a court now if it was okay and not. And in my beautiful city, Krakow, the Archbishop Marek Jędraszewski said in an anniversary of Warsaw Uprising, so very symbolic also, and anniversary for Polish people, that there was a red flag, and now we have a rainbow flag in country. We organized some kind of protests in the palace of the Archbishop Palace in Krakow, but it's still he is still repeating it all the time. So it's really outrageous. And what I say, Tour de Kaczynski, we have a campaign now because on the 13th of October we have elections general elections in Poland. So now every weekend, Law and Justice is in a different city, and every week Kaczynski is saying something about LGBT community. So, for example, a journalist from foreign media, from the Western media, are calling me and asking me, what can he say on the Sunday? What do you think? Or he will say something again. And it's we are waiting what he will say. So it's so they are still building campaign on the hate to LGBT community. I wanted to show you a few pictures from Białystok at the beginning. With the aggressive man with the middle finger towards us. There are movies when they are beating people. They are beating little girls even with the rainbow flags and rainbow bags. But I decided to show you something which happened after the Białystok, because in the next 2 weeks after, there were a lot of demonstrations in the whole Poland, also in the smaller cities, in a solidarity with Białystok and in the LGBT community. And we held one in Krakow. We made some kind of public party with a DJ, and we were dancing against hate. And it was in front of the city hall. We did it in a cooperation with the city hall, and it was over 2,000 people. And it was, it was in 2 or 3 days to gather. So I think that it was really nice. So I wanted to show you something positive, what happened after the hate and the violence that happened. Our answer for everything what is happening now. Of course, it's my experience and experience of my organizations, but of course we know that it's more difficult to lobbying on a national level. So we are trying to work with local authorities mostly, especially in the times of anti-LGBT declarations. So it's important to speak with them, and I'm proud of my work and my colleagues' work in Krakow, because after many years of trying, finally this year the president of the city is a founder of some kind of council for the equal treatment. So finally, we have like a tool to do something in the city when it comes to equality and human rights. Of course, grassroots movements, organizing ourselves and building communities. So we are less like be able to do, for example, things in Warsaw. So we are in a smaller cities, especially my organization is like doing things in the smaller cities on the southern part of Poland. We are building communities. We are trying to help people who are like trying to reach us, to organize events, to do more things when it comes to to integrate LGBT community, to also integrate them with the local communities. What is one of the most important things for me now in the LGBT witch hunt, which is happening in Poland, is support of youth, support of young people, because especially in the smaller cities, because they don't have a support there. It's more difficult for them to find out anything about, for example, being gay. So for me, it's one of the most important things. We are like traveling to smaller cities to meet with people. We are like trying to call them if they're reaching us, or trying to be like more and more informative when it comes to what is happening. Of course, being vocal, and it's also what Frank said about the international interest in what is happening. Media. It's more difficult because, as I told you, the Law and Justice Party is ruling like the public media, and they're using it to the propaganda. I think that in a few years, students of journalism will learn on this case how propaganda looks in the modern world, because it's really terrifying what is happening there. So we are working with journalists. We are trying to use storytelling, for example, to interest them when it comes to what is happening and how it affects us. For me, it's also important to speak for ourselves, to speak our emotions, to speak about our emotions, to show our emotions and how we feel when in this things which is happening. And I think that private media in Poland are more and more aware of it also, that it's not only, because usually it looks like they were inviting, for example, a very religious person and someone from the LGBT community, and it was like a fight, because they were speaking, for example, what is sin, and that it's sin, and we are not interested in speaking about sins. We are interested about speaking of the fact that we don't have rights, and so it changed now because of the situation. And of course, it's still like looking for allies, looking for people who want to step out also, and who are like vocal about the fact that it's outrageous what is happening now in Poland when it comes to LGBT community. And I think that for me also important thing is the European Union, that for us it's a chance to, as an institution, which can be on our side. I know that things now are happening in European Union when it comes to LGBT issues. So for example, for me, I'm happy that we have like 3 MPs now with whom we can cooperate. But for us also, it's as an activist, it's important also because of the financial reasons. We completely don't have enough for the last 4 years public funding. So we were a bit pushing European Union also to think about thinking about some kind of grants or programs when it comes to give money to, for example, organizations and movements in countries like ours. So I think that at the end, I can tell you also that for me, it's also about the resistance. It's also about the politics, which took me years to understand. That if we won't be political, if we will not interest in politics, politics will interest in us anyway. And I think it happened in Poland that in some kind of, I don't know, as I told you, it was like a March of this year. Things started to happen, and we had to react. But it's also about the solidarity. And I think that the solidarity is very important, especially in a country in which a solidarity movement started. So I'm full of hope. We have an elections. We all know, like off the record, that probably Law and Justice will win the elections, but I think that it's a way to the changes, and after it, everything will change, and I hope that everything will be okay. If you will interested in a situation in Poland or want to talk about something, you can find me on the social media. It's also, like Frank said, the social media are so important for us, and for example, I started to tweet more and more in English because to interest people abroad what is happening. And my two organizations in which we are working in the southern part of Poland, the one is organizing Equality March in Krakow and a Queer Mai Festival, and with the second we are like doing grassroots movements in the smaller cities. So thank you.